Though it may save your life, seldom did it pay the bills. The music was brash, loud, and rarely ever played on the radio. But Nirvana and grunge changed that in 1991. Unlike the classic rock, metal-indebted versions of grunge peddled by Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains, Nirvana's version was a slick collision of Black Flag and the Beatles, a punk metal pop hybrid previously unheard of by the mainstream public. But as Nirvana bassist Chris Novoselic once said in an interview, it was nothing new. Husker Du did it before us. Few bands summed up the pre-grunge alternative rock scene in the 1980s like Minneapolis's Husker Du. Their name came from a Danish board game that guitarist-songwriter Bob Mould recalled from his youth, ironically translated as "Do You Remember?" Starting as an underground hardcore band, they transformed into what we know today as alternative rock, a sound that would attract the attention of radio stations, major labels, and the masses. The musical groundwork they put in their 9 years of existence paved the way for the 90s alt-rock takeover. But who were Husker Du? Why were they so important? And how did they give birth to alternative rock? Before they were Husker Du, the band were named Buddy and the Returnables, formed in 1979. After a few live performances playing solely covers with a keyboardist, Charlie Pine, the band started rehearsing Ramones-inspired originals without Pine's knowledge. Husker Du's first official performance was on March 30th, 1979, where after several covers, the band launched into their searing double-time originals, much to Pine's confusion. His keyboard was unplugged midway through the performance, leaving Husker Du forevermore as a trio. Guitarist-vocalist Bob Mould, drummer-vocalist Grant Hart, and bassist Greg Norton. Fueled by a bit too much amphetamine, their debut live album, Land Speed Record, was released in 1982, packing 17 songs into 26.5 minutes. It was powerfully fast, but with a hint of melody that set them apart from the hardcore bands they frequently played shows with.
Initially we're like, yeah, let's play faster than the Ramones. And then we heard the Dickies, and it's like, well, let's play faster than the Dickies. I always like to say that Husker was the hardcore punk band. You could whistle their tunes.
Their debut studio album, Everything Falls Apart, released the next year, is similarly fast, with the title track being the only real letter. This, along with their relentless touring and live reputation, got the band signed to SST, the independent label of Black Flag guitarist Greg Gibb, home to other influential 80s acts like the Meat Puppets, Minutemen, and later Sonic Youth and the Descendants. Husker Du's first release on SST was their Metal Circus EP, which produced their first hit on college radio. College radio was a big contribution to the proliferation of alternative rock in the 1980s. During the late 1970s, student-run radio stations became a mainstay in college towns, not tied to playing the hits like top 40 stations of the day. College radio became very popular due to its music choices, expanded beyond the mainstream. So this included European synth-pop, post-punk, and indie. As well as this new breed of American alternative rock. Tracks like became early hits within this format, and this is exactly what the replacement song Left of the Dial is about. Music that is off the beaten track, an alternative to the mainstream. College radio and their playlisting choices would be a precursor to the alt-rock centric stations of the 90s. The song of metal circus that got airplay on these college radio stations was Diane. Slower and more considered than the light-speed punk of their earlier work, it told the true story of the murder of teenage waitress Diane Edwards, sung from the point of view of the killer, inspired by a news article Hart had read. Its morbid subject matter was an advancement in what hardcore bands could sing about, no longer just overtly political music. It was an evolution to hardcore music in the same way Eleanor Rigby was a next step for the Beatles, no longer singing about themselves and their experiences, but looking outward, having interest and empathizing with others outside their realm of understanding. Diane spread their music nationwide and beyond. Therapy from Northern Ireland, greatly inspired by Husker Du, notably covered the song in 1995, replacing the serrated guitars with haunted cello work. In 1984, Husker Du released what is considered their opus, Zen Arcade. On that album, the band moved from being a hardcore band with a head for melody to something that is much more recognizable as alternative rock. It may be abrasive and heavy in parts, but most importantly, it's tuneful enough that it can be appreciated by people other than the punk kids. There's the hardcore thrash in Mold's Broken Home, Broken Heart, and I'll Never Forget You. But there's also piano sections, psychedelic interludes, and more deeply emotional moments, mostly written by Hart, including album high point, Pink Turns to Blue. And a solely acoustic track in the form of Never Talking to You Again.
There are things that I'd like to say, but I'm never talking to you again.
Their songwriting duality really becomes apparent on this album. Mold more brash and anguished, Hart more interested in pop melody, a Lennon-McCartney relationship for 80s punk. Zen Arcade is a concept album, the story of a young punk who leaves home and wrestles with whether to join the army, a cult, or get a job in video game design. On his journey, he finds and loses love before reaching his lowest point, realizing that he will never be able to change his situation, before then waking up, the whole journey being a dream. While not the first punk rock concept album, That's Life by Sham 69 probably has that title, it would influence the more adventurous punks going forward. Fucked Up and Titus Andronicus' sprawling narratives owe a lot to Husker Du. If you think the story of Zen Arcade sounds familiar, that is probably because elements of the story are taken by Green Day for their 2004 album American Idiot. Foo Fighters' Dave Grohl was also inspired by the album. In 1995, he said,
That album was amazing. I mean, Black Flag was early on, and then when I discovered Zen Arcade, I thought, God, these people write songs, man. Yeah. It's amazing. It's like the Byrds meets Black Flag, and it just blew me away. And the songs just stuck in your head forever, and they're just amazing.